Great, here we're going to talk about using the Desmos calculator to substitute a number into an expression and find the value of that expression. When I say an expression, I really just mean something like this, where we would follow order of operations to find the value of that thing. Another way to say that is to evaluate or simplify the expression. It basically just means that we are going to find the value of that expression when we plug numbers in for the variables that we're given. So here we're given A and B. Instead of that A and B, we're going to plug those numbers in and actually use order of operations to figure out what that equals. The most important part of this is that we always use parentheses when we substitute a number in for a variable. So instead of thinking of this as just 9, really, I'm going to put parentheses around it right away, just so I remember to substitute that in place of that letter. So instead of just 9 going in place of A, I'm going to put 9 in parentheses in place of that A. So I'm going to rewrite this expression. 5 minus, then I have my opening parentheses here. That's written in the problem. And then I have A. So instead of that A, I'm going to put 9 in parentheses. Minus 6 times B, and instead of that B, I'm going to put negative 4 in there in parentheses. Everything else is identical. I wrote all other numbers and symbols outside of those parentheses. Instead of A, I just replaced it with 9, and instead of B, I replaced that with negative 4. Each of those numbers got their own set of parentheses. So in the Desmos calculator, you can either just click on those buttons, the parentheses, or I find it a little bit easier to type, so you'd hit Shift and then 9, and that would start your parentheses. So Desmos does this completely for you. You normally had to do this by hand, but now just typing this into the Desmos calculator makes this a lot easier. So I'm going to type it exactly as I see it, 5 minus, then the grouping starts, and inside the grouping I have 9 minus 6 times negative 4. And then I close the grouping symbol, and that gives me negative 28 as my final answer there. So that's following order of operations for me. As long as I'm careful about how I type that in, each number gets its own set of parentheses, and everything else is rewritten the same. This parentheses here and this one here, that's just given to me from the problem. So it looks a little bit confusing because there's a bunch of set of parentheses in there, but really just type it out exactly as you write it the first time after you substitute those numbers in. So this expression has a value of negative 28. So if I ask you to simplify that expression or evaluate the expression with those values, you're just asked to follow order of operations or use the Desmos calculator to find the value of it. Try this one on your own. Pause the video, try that one on your own before you move on. All right, and the next one, we have to be careful about the exact same kind of thing. We still have to give each number its own set of parentheses, but here we have exponents. So the first thing I'm going to do is just rewrite that expression, this thing, with negative 10 in place of x, and actually this is supposed to be a y. We're going to put negative 2 in place of that y there. So I'm going to write this expression exactly as I see it, negative, then I see that I have my first x there, so I'm going to put negative 10 in parentheses there, with the exponent on the outside of that. Please pay attention to where the stuff is in relation to the parentheses that we just set up. We have a negative sign in front, so we keep the negative sign in front. This is negative 10 because that's the number that we were given to plug in. The exponent goes on the outside of the parentheses because only the number that we're given goes in the parentheses there. Plus, then we start that second grouping symbol there. Y is negative 2, plus another y, which is another negative 2. And again, notice where this cube exponent is. That exponent of 3 is on the outside of the grouping symbol. So we have to close that up and then type our exponent of 3. So negative 10 squared. So you can either just hit this button, or you can hit this button, hit that button, and then type in a 2. Or you can hit Shift and the 6, and that automatically gives you that exponent, and you can type in whatever you want. then plus, in parentheses, -2, plus another -2, also gets its own set of parentheses. Then we close that grouping symbol, and then we raise that to the third power. Again, you could click this, and then type 3, or actually, if you wanted to, you could hit that, and then change that into a 3. Either way, you should get -164. If by accident you put this 3 on the inside of this set of parentheses, if you attach it to the -2, instead of the final answer there, the final expression there, you would have gotten -110, which is completely different. You want to put the exponent on the outside, because we're cubing the entire thing. We have y plus y cubed there. And try this problem on your own, and then continue with the video. Division's a little bit weird in the Desmos calculator because anytime you type in division, it's going to set up a fraction. Actually, these two buttons are pretty much the same thing. This division key and setting up a fraction like this, or using the /, all of those do the exact same thing in Desmos. They all set up a fraction that looks kind of like this. The one important thing is if we don't have parentheses on top, we have to know that that's actually a grouped thing. So in this example, that's going to be really important. You're going to have to put parentheses around that when you type this in. So when you're doing that example on your own, put that part in parentheses so that the entire thing is divided by n squared. Otherwise, it's just going to kind of break it apart and divide just one part of it by n squared. Right, so the example that I'm going to show you, we have n as -2. There's another typo. That should really be n. That equals 3. So I'm going to write this expression, -7 times -2 squared minus 5 minus n squared minus 3. Just the n is squared. That exponent of 2 is just attached to this 3, then the grouping symbol shows up there. And that gets divided by 2. So I have -7 times -2 raised to the second power minus, in a grouping symbol, 5 minus 3 squared. Close the grouping symbol, and now I'm telling it to divide that whole thing by 2. This section, 5 minus 3 squared, just that part, is over 2. That's the fraction part. That's exactly what I'm seeing here. 5 minus 3 squared, all divided by 2. That gives me my final answer of -26. If you did not type the parentheses there, let's just show that. 5 minus 3 to the second power, divided by 2. It's just going to chop this up and only divide the second part. It's just going to divide this part by 2. That's why we have to put this in a grouping symbol. We have to basically tell the calculator, I want to divide this entire thing by 2, not just this part. So when you're doing this example, make sure you put parentheses around this, even if it's not written. I was kind of nice on this problem. I actually wrote it there, so it's clear what we're typing. Here, you just have to know that that whole thing is a group that's getting divided by whatever's on the bottom. Absolute value is actually a key directly on your keyboard. If you look for this backslash, it's right above the enter key. Right above that, if you hit shift and then that key, you actually have the absolute value bar, or one of them, on your keyboard. Or of course, you could just click on this button right here. That lets you use the absolute value inside of there. So we are trying to write this -x times the absolute value of x squared minus 5 squared, where x is 2. So -2. That x gets replaced with the 2 in the parentheses. This x also gets replaced with that 2 in parentheses. I have an absolute value, and then 2 squared minus 5 squared, and then I close my absolute value. So I have -2 times the absolute value of 2 squared minus 5 squared. And I close my absolute value. Close my absolute value. And it gives me -42 as my final answer. You can see that Desmos actually understands that you're going to want to close that anyway. So if you forget to close it, if that's the end of the problem, Desmos figures that out for you. But if you then had, let's say after that, you had like -10 after that, if you don't close the absolute value, it thinks that's included. So I would be careful about that. Make sure you close the absolute value, especially if it's not the end of the problem. Again, try this one on your own just to make sure that you're getting it. Then move on to the square root. It's kind of the same thing. A number outside of a square root is just being multiplied by that. So we're going to substitute in x, 2, in parentheses, in place of that x, and that x. So negative 2 times the square root of 5, and then I start another set of parentheses because I have another x there. That gets replaced with 2 in parentheses. That one's cubed. Minus 6 times another 2 in parentheses squared. Notice that the square root covers the entire second part of that expression. We have only the negative 2 on the outside. This square root symbol covers the rest of that expression. So I have negative 2 times the square root. I'm going to use this button. 5 times 2 raised to the third power. Again, you could use this for the third power, or you can hit shift and then the 6 key, and that automatically raises it up to that whatever exponent you want to type next. Plus 6, minus 6 times 2 raised to the second power. That gives us negative 8 as our final answer. So we have one more problem to try on your own. Get that checked before you move on to the back. Actually, there's a mistake on this one. This should not be a negative 2. That should actually be a positive 2. Just get rid of that negative sign when you're typing this in, or when you're writing that out. That actually should be a positive 2, not a negative 2. Otherwise, it's trying to take the square root of negative, and that won't work. All right, if you need any help, ask for help. Once you finish these, get them checked, and then you can move right on to the back for practice.